Alright, this is the first class of Revelation. We're audio recording it, so don't cuss. Are there any questions about Revelation before we start that you came with? Okay, then, first thing.
An empty slate.
First thing, what everybody wants to know is who is the Antichrist? It's always the big question. So, it's very simple. The Antichrist. Now, to understand the number 666, alright? You have to understand that Greek was the lingua franca of the Roman Empire. Now, in the Roman Empire, there was a man named Marcus. Now, anyone who's named Marcus will be named after Marcus Aurelius, who was a man who showed himself to be quite wise. He considered himself a philosopher, but underneath all of that, you have a man who is infamous for killing Christians, persecuting the people of God. Now there's another name, Dalyn. Now Dalyn is a word that does not actually have a meaning in and of itself. So you have persecuting of the people of God and meaninglessness. So a meaningless persecution. That's what the name Marcus Dalyn means. Now Dalyn is actually a conglomeration of two names, Dayton and Linden. And if you read in Leviticus, you'll find, prohibitions about mixing two things that shouldn't go together, like mixing wool and cotton, two different kinds of fabric. It's called an abomination. So we have the abomination of desolation, the meaningless persecution of the people of God. And if you take these two names, the man who has these two names he's the kind of man who would spend his 12th wedding anniversary in a building teaching 4 people about the book of Revelation. But understand, in Greek, they use letters for numbers and numbers for letters. And so if you look at these, if we were to take these two names and put them into their Greek characters, all right, you would have, Mu, Alpha, Rho, Kappa, Upsilon, and then Delta, Alpha, Lambda, Dalyn, Iota, Nu. Alright? Now, these letters, honest to goodness, have a numerical value. Alright? So if you add them up, you have 40, 100, 20, 400, 200, which if you add those numbers together, you get the number 761. That is the number of the persecutor of the people of God. Dalyn, add these letters together, you have 4, 1, 30, 10, 50. Add them together, you get the number 95. This is the number of meaninglessness. And if you take away the meaninglessness from this persecutor of the people of God, if you give him a purpose, subtract meaningless from persecution, you get, of course, 666. There you have it.
Mark of the beast.
The mark of the beast. Marcus Dalyn.
What's your middle name?
Dalyn. So.
I knew that.
Yes, there it is.
Uh-oh.
Now you know. Now.
It's going to go downhill.
This is going to go down.
And it's between us and the door.
My young Padawans. This is a practice called eisegesis. That is where you start with an idea and then you find it in the scriptures. Okay? This is different from a term called exegesis. not extra Jesus, but exegesis, which is where you find what the scriptures say and use that to understand what is true. Okay? Eisegesis, exegesis. Very often you will have someone come up with some idea. They found someone who they just know is the Antichrist, and they will always come up with a great argument. Mine may not have been so great, and they will find a way to prove it. Okay. In my very short lifetime, Bill Clinton has been the Antichrist. Yasser Arafat's been the Antichrist. I still remember back when the Soviet Union was the great whore of Babylon, and now it's been turned into the Muslim world in the Middle East, the European Union as well. Ronald Reagan, for a while, was the Antichrist. Before my lifetime, of course, Adolf Hitler was the Antichrist, Mussolini was the Antichrist, the communists. Not everybody, so many people have a tendency of seeing what they see as evil and figuring out a way to show that the Bible, and particularly Revelation, because it's easier to manipulate, says what they already believed before they opened the book. Okay? So we're going to avoid that. But did y'all enjoy the little exercise?
I did.
These really are the numbers and letters. That's true.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. 12 years
12
of
years.
bliss.
I can only tell you.
Hear that, Shannon? 12 years of bliss.
47 was the most difficult. We're really hoping it gets easier.
So, since this is the first class, we're going to do introductory stuff and then any questions that you have. Okay. The first thing that we need to look at is genre, and the next thing is setting. If we miss these two, we miss the whole book, and now we have eisegesis. Okay? So, who knows anything about the genre? There's actually 3 genres involved in this book. Apocalypse. Well, the way we usually say it when we're talking about the genre, the name of the genre is apocalyptic. Okay? Also, the book is prophetic, and it is a letter. Now, let's start with the last one we got here. It's a letter. What does that tell us?
Written to somebody.
It was written to somebody, okay? Okay, and in the very beginning of it, it tells us who it was written to. Okay? Right here. Read that for me.
John,
John?
to the 7 churches in the province of Asia.
All right, there we have who wrote it. The guy's name was John, and who it was written. 7 provinces in the church. 7 churches in the provinces of Asia. See if I have a good map. I'll show where Asia was. Yes. All right. When we say Asia, we mean that area right there. Okay, so here's Israel, Mediterranean Sea, Asia.
It's Turkey.
That's where Turkey is now. Okay. We're not talking about the continent of Asia. We're talking about the Roman province, which is modern-day Turkey. They were actual churches there. And John was writing an actual letter to actual churches. So that gives us some assumptions. One assumption is that the book deals with topics that would have been relevant to those people. Okay? That's a good assumption. They would have understood it. That's another assumption. Okay. Because we'll get to this in setting, we know the time and the place, where it was written, to whom it was written. Yes, sir.
Is he responding to questions?
He's not responding specifically to questions, but he is responding to, or at least it's not questions that they have directly asked him, but it is responding to situations that they are going through at that time.
Yeah.
So when we read it, we're going to be trying to understand what would they have understood it to mean. And then we will try to understand how to apply that knowledge to our own situation. But it was written to them, it's not written to us. We're reading somebody else's mail. Okay, so there's nothing in this book about Bill Clinton. There's nothing in this book about the conflict in Syria. Okay, there's nothing in this book about our current situation. What we do have is information about their situation, which we can then apply to our own situation. Does that make sense? Okay. It's a big distinction.
Do we have a date on this?
Yes. But hang on.
Thank you.
All right. So it's a letter. The second part is, it is a prophetic book. Okay? And in the book it even refers to itself as a prophecy. Now what do we know about prophecy? What is a prophecy? What does it do? What does a prophet do?
Foretells the future.
That's part of it. They can foretell the future, okay? But mainly, what is the prophet's job? Because if you actually read through the prophets, like the Old Testament prophets, you'll find here and there a little bit of, here's what's about to happen. But mostly what you have are, you have a prophet who has read the covenant of God. The prophet is looking at the current situation, and he is saying, you have strayed from the covenant. And he is calling them to come back. And he's going to pronounce blessings if they return to the covenant, and he's going to pronounce cursings and woes and disasters if they continue to leave the covenant. Okay. They are also, by the way, usually political. Like I said, the prophet's job, okay, he's like a prosecuting attorney, okay. So he's got the law written down, and he says, you people have broken the law. Here's the punishment if you continue. Here's the blessing if you return. Okay, and so because that's their main job, they tend to be very in the moment. Okay, they're looking at specific situations. This is what you are doing, and how it does not line up with the covenant. And then when the situation changes, whether there's a new king, whether there's a new alliance with a different nation, whatever the situation, then you have another prophet, or sometimes the same prophet, issuing a different warning. Now this is your situation, and this is how it transgresses the covenant. Okay.
So it's kind of like CNN.
I never watch CNN. I don't have television.
It's just a matter of interpreting current events, current affairs, in terms of a set of beliefs, understandings, regulations, something over here.
That's exactly it, and that's what the prophet does. And it's only vicariously that it involves some pronouncements about the future. Okay.
Well, it's like the prophets, somebody on CNN saying, you know, we keep this bond buying thing up, taxes are going to go up.
Right.
And then taxes go up, and everybody says, wow, we're going to have a new king. Well, you can get a new king about every 40 years anyway.
Right.
So you're prophesying with certainty.
Right, right. And in the same way, if you look at a lot of the Old Testament prophets, it'd be things like, you've just made an alliance with Assyria. Assyria is our enemy. You're trusting them instead of God. We're a tiny nation. They're a great empire. They're going to come in and take over. Now, that's a prophet's job. That's a lot of what the prophets talked about. It ought to be a no-brainer. Of course Assyria is going to do this. We're right here on the Fertile Crescent. We're a great trade route. They want to control us. Okay? Oh, now you've made a covenant both with Assyria and with Egypt, and you're not telling each other about it. You know, you can't keep up the two-time, and they're going to find out, and they're both going to come in, and you're going to be the battleground for a war between two opposing empires. That's going to come up in the book of Revelation, right? So, nobody told me I wrote prophetic.
I was going to change it after the session was over.
Prophetic, thank you. All right, now, the big tricksy one, apocalyptic genre. What do we know about apocalyptic?
It's the end of everything. Life as we know it.
Okay. All right. But no. Let's see. Of course, we've named the genre after this book. Okay, if you've ever seen, sometimes you'll open a Bible and it will say the Apocalypse of St. John. Okay, apocalypse is a Greek word. Revelation is the English word. Apocalyptic means unveiling or revealing revelation. That's what the word means. Are there any other apocalyptic books that you are familiar with?
In the Bible?
Or anywhere?
Well, there's a lot of people that are always saying what's going to happen.
There's that whole series of books about the rapture.
Hey, that genre is called fiction.
Oh, but that's what it's about. And in fact,
Daniel.
He's looking for a book.
A good chunk of Daniel is apocalyptic. Okay, it begins with some stories about, I got thrown in the lion's den one time. These 3 kids got chucked in the fire one time. And then it goes on with these strange visions.
dreams.
Okay, parts of Ezekiel. Okay, especially up at the beginning. Do you remember the weird acid trip thing at the beginning where he's like, I saw this thing, and they're like wheels and within wheels, and there's eyes all over them. These guys with their wings out, and they move, but they don't flap their wings, and they're covered in eyes, and fire from the waist up, fire from the waist down, and okay, you remember Ezekiel? Okay.
I think it was mushrooms.
Was it mushrooms? All right. So mushrooms, we're going to say. Some parts of Zechariah, okay, he starts having this strange vision about 4 horsemen, okay, running all over the earth. He has this vision about 2 golden lampstands, okay, things that John is going to pick up, and he's going to take their images and recycle them. John borrows heavily from all 3 of these books and from other books. And in John's Apocalypse, he takes their pictures and he takes their images and he takes their pronouncements and he twists and turns them around and he writes something different using the same pictures. And there's similarities and there's differences, and we have to pay attention to both. Right? The kind of, other than the book of Revelation, the sort of penultimate apocalypse, the one that sort of sets the standard for the genre, is not found in our Bible. It is called First Enoch. First Enoch is part of the Bible in Ethiopia and nowhere else. It was heavily read by the early church fathers. Many of them considered it to be scripture. It is quoted by Jude in the New Testament. It was an incredibly popular book around the time of Jesus. The way that we know that is that when they found the caves in Qumran, and they found all these Dead Sea Scrolls. They found an awful lot of copies of First Enoch. And from that, they are going to conjecture that this was a well-known book. Okay. Now, First Enoch, okay, is representative of a strain of Judaism that, for our purposes, we're going to call the apocalyptic strain. Okay, and they had some specific ideas. Now, Judaism was not completely homogeneous until after the fall of the temple. Okay, you had different groups. You had the Pharisees, who were, very zealous about the law. You had the Sadducees, who did not believe in, supernatural and the resurrection. It was just strictly moral kind of stuff. You had scribes. But you had this group of apocalyptics, which is not what they call themselves. Their main focus was on the king. Okay, they had sort of a cult of the king, where they held special reverence for him as a divine person. Okay, the connection between heaven and earth, and they have ample evidence for this in the Psalms. If you read some of the Psalms, things that they say about David. Okay, when they're speaking about David, the human being, they say things like, "Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever," things of that sort. Right? "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." All right, the psalmists were talking about a man, David. Okay, and that's a kind of a normal idea in that area of the world at that time, that the kings were sons of God. Okay. Another idea that comes out of this book and the whole thought process that it kind of enshrines is the idea of someone called the Son of Man. The Son of Man is a divine figure who sits at the right hand of the Father, who is responsible for getting creation going. This is a guy who, at the end of the age, is going to gather the nations together and is going to judge them. Okay, this is a term that comes up a lot in the New Testament. Jesus uses this term to talk about himself. The term is only found once in the Old Testament, and it is in one of those apocalyptic parts of Daniel. The idea gets really fleshed out in this other book, this apocalyptic strain, First Enoch. Okay, some of the other terms that come, which seriously you can't hardly understand without getting that kind of thought strain. Terms like the elect, the holy ones, or saints. Okay, the Christ. Okay, if you've ever noticed, Christ is not a word that pops up in the Old Testament. Not even the Jewish version, Messiah. It doesn't pop up much. Okay, it's used once to refer to Nebuchadnezzar. I'm not sure where else it's used. There are other terms that are used, like prophet like Moses, or talk about the king. But the idea of taking these different terms, these different titles, and applying them to one person, that came through this apocalyptic school of Judaism that, again, First Enoch sort of enshrines and encapsulates. I bring up this book because it is classic apocalyptic, and it can help us to understand how to read the book of Revelation. And we do have a copy of it, I think, on the shelf over here. If not, it's in my office. It's a weird book, okay? But here's some of the things that are normal for apocalyptic, okay? Numerology. They use numbers, they play with numbers, they're really fascinated with round numbers like 7, 12, 1,000, 1. They like numbers that, I'm sorry?
40.
40?
40.
40, yes. 1,260, which is going to come up a lot. 3.5, which is half of 7. We're going to come up with the number of Jesus, which is 888, which is like 3 sevens plus 1 on top. The number of, hey, it's in there. And it's also one of these, like we did with my name, if you add up the letters in this name, it comes to 888.
That's presuming you're on a base 10. Because most of this stuff was done on base 10.
Well, well, okay. Okay, I don't know enough about that. Okay, numerology. They use numbers symbolically, not what we would call literally. Angelology. There's a lot of speculation about divine beings other than God himself, sort of the his messengers. Now, these are the folks who in the Old Testament are called the gods, okay, the people that we refer to as the angels, or more specifically the 9 choirs of angels. So the seraphim and the cherubim and the thrones and the powers and principalities and dominions and all of those folks. Okay. Angelology. One that comes up, it's normal for the genre, but John doesn't include it, is demon babies. Okay, like Rosemary's Baby, the movie, okay. Or Little Nicky, which was an Adam Sandler knockoff of that. That's normal for the genre. John doesn't include it. This is the idea of a fallen angel or a demon impregnating a human woman and the offspring taking over. That idea has sometimes been applied to the term antichrist, but it really doesn't fit if you're doing exegesis. Okay? Heavenly journeys. Okay? Now, John dabbles in this a little bit, in that he gets caught up to heaven and he sees things there. But he really doesn't get into it like most other apocalypses, because most other apocalypses, they take these heavenly journeys many times over and they see a lot of random speculative curiosities. They get these maps of heaven, where I saw this mountain made of gold and another one made of silver and another one made of fire, and I saw the 4 different places where the souls who departed are kept. One is, hell, one is paradise, and 2 in between for those who aren't quite bad enough for hell or aren't quite good enough for paradise. In Enoch, you get this whole long astronomy thing where he's telling you exactly where the planets move and how the stars turn. We don't get too much of that in John, okay? But it is normal for the genre. Okay, cataclysm. Now this we do have, and we have it a few times over. Okay, a cataclysm, where everything finally just falls apart and comes back together at the end of all things. Now, these kinds of books were always written during times of persecution, okay? And they were written for the purpose of sort of taking back the veil, right, Revelation, and letting us see our current situation from God's perspective. That's the basic idea of apocalyptic, okay, is that when here we are, we're being persecuted, we're being overrun by our enemies, it looks like God is absent, or if he's here, he's too weak to do anything. And so what an apocalyptic book does pulls back the veil. It gets a broader perspective on what's going on. And it says, no, if you step back far enough, you see the pattern. Things are ordered. At the moment it seems like chaos, but if you stand back far enough, you'll see that it is ordered. God is in control. And God will bring all of our sufferings around in the final cataclysm to where they work out right. Does that make sense? And so, because that is what we're doing, apocalyptic books will generally have a message of encouragement for those who are faithful to God during the suffering, and warning to those who are compromising with the worldly powers. So that's the basic genre of apocalyptic. So what does that tell us about how to read this?
Well, it says to me that the people in Turkey were being persecuted.
Mm-hmm. The people in Turkey were being persecuted.
So they get this note from John that says, hang in there, guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's all gonna be okay, and here's a way it might work out.
For some of them, it's hang in there. For some of them, it's
you're over the edge.
repent now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're over the edge.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the encouragement side.
Well, no, that's the encouragement side is for those that are acting appropriately and putting God first. It's supposed to be encouragement.
But it hurts
The outliers.
Outliers back towards the centrist.
Right. Yeah, it's very much we're at war. You're making your bed, you're going to lie in it.
Yeah.
So choose wisely.
Yeah, pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think a lot of the cataclysmic references are to be sure that people pay attention?
I believe so, yeah. To pay attention, but also to let them know that it is going to have an end.
Yeah. And it's not pretty. If you don't change, it's not pretty.
Right. And John's Revelation is set up in a very interesting way. There are three ultimate cataclysms. Okay, he's got these he's got three different sets of 7 judgments that we're going to go through. Each one, when you get to the end, you have the cataclysm, the end of all things, and then you have the restoration, and then you have an interlude where he sees something else at heaven, and then he goes on with the next 7 judgments, and it ends with the end of the world, and then you have an interlude where he sees something else in heaven, and then he goes on to show you the last 7 judgments, which ends with the end of the world, and then you see something else in heaven. Okay, the structure of his book is really brilliant. Okay, but you have to take it as it is. Okay, you can't just see it as here's the map of what is happening or what is going to happen in the order that it's going to occur. He doesn't do that. Okay? He gives us something, and he gives it to us over and over in different ways. He shows it to us. Okay? Well, we brought up the suffering, the persecution, so let's talk about setting. Like every other book, there's debate on this. Okay, there's debate on who wrote it. There's debate on when it was written. What was the situation? Let's just say, for the purposes of this class, we are going to go along with what the church has always understood this to be, and that is written by not just John, because there are a lot of Johns, but the Apostle John. And it was written while he was exiled to the island of Patmos. Okay? In the year 96 AD. 96 AD is very important because that is during the reign of the Emperor Domitian. There had been a great persecution, first begun by the Emperor Caligula, continued and somewhat expanded under the Emperor Nero. He was a horrible man. It was during his reign that Peter was crucified upside down in the city of Rome. It was during his reign that Paul was beheaded in Rome. It was during his reign that the historians from that time said that it was normal to walk through the streets and find them filled with dead bodies. It was normal to, on the road to Rome, the road would be lit with crosses. On each cross there was a Christian who had been crucified and been wrapped in cloth, soaked in oil, and lit up to light the pavement. Okay, that was the kind of persecution that we're talking about. That was the Emperor Nero, but it was pretty much confined to Rome. After Nero came Emperor Vespasian, who gave the church a little bit of relaxation, but there was this idea at the time among the entire Roman Empire, this idea that, Nero was an evil man. He's gone now. We believe he's dead, but that's just the story. He's not really dead. He's going to be coming back, and he is going to renew his evil, mad, crazy reign. Okay, that was an idea that was being passed around by all kinds of people, not just Christians. John is going to steal that idea and use it and say, in Domitian, Nero has come back, kind of come back from the dead. Not reincarnation, but this is the same stuff. Under Domitian's reign, the persecution spread, not just confined to Rome, but started spreading across the empire. And it, among other things, had John exiled into the island of Patmos out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and left his churches over in Asia Minor without their spiritual leader, and now suffering under persecution, official state-sponsored persecution. Domitian demands that gold and silver images of himself be set up in the different temples, and that he be worshipped as God. And the people at the time were required to confess that, yes, Caesar is Lord. And he referred to himself, and everybody else fell in line by talking about him as my Lord and God Domitian. Okay, that's who Domitian is. He's the guy in charge at the time. There's some other things about the setting. Okay, it's 96 AD. It's in the Roman Empire. There's some things that are going to pop up, and you have to understand kind of the situation. One of those things is the use of trade guilds at the time. Trade guilds, if you can sort of, in your mind, mix together our current trade unions and the Masonic lodges, okay, where it's not just about our trade and keeping our trade and regulating prices, but there are also rituals and mysteries and secret knowledge attached to it, okay? In order to participate in trade, you had to sacrifice to that trade's god, okay? Now, Domitian, of course, takes over these and decides not only do you sacrifice to your own little trade god, but you also sacrifice to me and you worship me, okay? So when we come back to that mark of the beast and no one can buy or sell, that was a real reality. You couldn't do business, you couldn't trade without worshiping the emperor. Okay, so any questions so far? No questions. Okay. Let's see. I think that's about all I have for this week, and we'll get into the actual book starting next week. All right? Okay. Cool.